everyone wants to live longer. It's literally the goal of everyone. But we seem to be reaching an asymptote here as well. And in fact, we're starting to see life expectancy declines in Western countries, which is really paradoxical. If you have all this great technological growth, like sequencing genome costs, data costs, compute costs, microscopes can see more scientific output, why isn't this happening with life expectancy? And that's really puzzling. And then you have national healthcare expenditures, which I have charts for this that go back way past that, but you can't blame healthcare spending on me, because since 1970 we've spent more and more and more on healthcare. As a percentage of our economy, it's gone from 5 or 10% to 25% of our economy is related to healthcare, which is crazy. And I actually think that it'll become 50% over time. And this isn't because of one Martin Shkreli or one Heather Bresch or one actor. This is because we have infinite demand for healthcare, and the supply of healthcare is very limited. The marginal return on healthcare is always welcome, whereas the marginal return on something like food, you could spend more money on food instead of going to CVS or, I don't know, Walmart for food, or Kroger. You could go to Whole Foods, and instead of going to Whole Foods, you could go to Dina DeLuca. And instead of Dina DeLuca, you can get something even more expensive. You could have a private chef. But eventually, the marginal return on that expenditure is limited. Same thing applies to clothing. You may not like Old Navy, and you may not like The Gap, and you may not like Abercrombie, but eventually the marginal return on the next dollar on the marginal expense is very, very limited. It's not true for healthcare. It's a very different feeling for healthcare, where we really can never be healthy enough. And if you have a lot of disposable income, the one thing that you're interested in spending that money on, if you can, is to prolong your life, and quality of life especially. So here's another funny metric. Since 1940, the amount of drugs that have been FDA approved has not grown. This is a local minima. And I'm not, as much as I'm a libertarian and an generally anti-regulation, anti-government person, this isn't the FDA's fault. This is a systemic problem where it's very hard to come up with new medicines. And you would think we would break out of this bottleneck and we'd have 50, then 100, then 200 new drugs approved every year. Well, it's not happening. Even though the technology we had in 1940 and the technology we have in 2023 are so far away from each other in so many ways, we still have the same number of drugs that are FDA approved, which is really bizarre kind of metric. Now, you can see it's kind of slowly growing again, and maybe it'll keep growing, but in recent years, it's been about the same. And I would hope that reaches an exponent, because the number of drugs that are approved every year is really a testament to how many great problems in medicine are solved. The only way a drug can get approved is if it solves a major problem in medicine. And I think that might give a clue as to why that sort of doesn't happen. So the long story short here is that I think one of the biggest pain points for healthcare expenditure, and why we see healthcare expense going up and up and up, but all these technology expenses going down, down, and down, is that the number of physicians we have, this is from 1900. We've had about 20 physicians per 100,000 people, and this chart has it go up to about 30, but in general, it's been fairly static over centuries. This is a couple of more zoomed in ones, where the number of new physicians per million patients has actually been fairly kind of flat to down over the last few decades, and the number of med school graduates is basically stuck in a rut there. So I think that one of the things about drugs is it's very hard to do these clinical trials without physicians. In fact, you absolutely need physicians, and they're very much the cost of doing doing clinical trials is virtually all of the cost. So is actually getting physicians to enroll clinical trials. The actual drug part of the clinical trial is not very expensive. It's all about getting the physician motivated to take the patient out of their normal framework and workflow and into a new workflow, which is difficult. Clinical trial is a lot of work. So in my experience in pharma, the only way you can get people to take to do a clinical trial is if you pay them a lot of money. And the first thing a doctor will say when they're considering whether or not they should do a clinical trial is, how much is in it for me? And I can't say that I blame a physician for doing that, but what I can say is that I know a lot of people were pretty upset with me, and a lot of people are pretty upset that we spend more and more money on healthcare nonstop, and why is that happening? And again, I think it's a demand side function, but it doesn't mean that technology can't interfere. So what we've done, how would we change the game? How could we change everything? And I think that it's going to take place at the doctor side. So I'm not trying to say that I don't like doctors, because I have a lot of friends who are physicians. I grew up wanting to be a physician myself. So there's certainly no hatred for physicians. But I think you can still have a sober, analytical kind of, inconvenient kind of truths to this that are worth mentioning without necessarily making an enemy of any doctor, which is not my goal. But I think if you look at the price of physicians, they're the lion's share of healthcare costs. So we spend about $4 trillion a year in America on healthcare. Only 10% of that goes to pharma. So that's one of the reasons I was kind of upset. Most people, when they get criticized in the corporate world, they quickly apologize and they quickly disappear. And they typically disappear because they get fired by their board of directors, because the board of directors says, well, if they're going after him, the CEO, him or her, they'll soon go after us, so let's get rid of this person before it's too late. And that's why most of the time these folks will resign. But I had my own company, and I had my own mind made up that I wasn't wrong. So I was very stubborn, and that reaction was more surprising than what I had to say. I think what I had to say made sense, but the defiance was actually more surprising than anything. Well, why was I so defiant? Why was I so kind of hell-bent on proving that I felt I was right, even though I knew it was kind of a hopeless attempt? Well, I really felt that I was right because I knew that pharmaceuticals are only a small part of the healthcare pie. Most of the healthcare pie, and if you think about pharmaceuticals as being downstream of a physician's decision, then all, in fact, healthcare spending is downstream of a physician's decision. So therefore, the entire body of healthcare costs come from physicians at some point. And so the problem with physicians is we have a limited supply of them, and many people feel that the AMA, who audits the medical schools and limits the amount of graduates for medical schools, creates this labor supply problem, where we have a very finite number of physicians. We have, as I mentioned, a growing healthcare demand that's embodied and explained by the amount of money we're spending. This isn't just one Martin Shkreli or one Daraprim. This is a whole country of people who want to live longer, want to be healthier, want to have more memories and more great moments of their life. This is why life expectancy has risen and risen. We strive for this, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's great. But unless we had more physicians, the price of that demand for a static number of physicians will only grow and grow. And it's no secret the doctors make about 5 times the average income in America. Doctors have other drawbacks. The variability and quality of a physician can vary greatly depending on where you live. I live in New York City. It's not hard to find a good doctor in New York City. But if you live in Idaho or Nebraska, depending on where you live, it can be very difficult.